Have you wondered what an anti-inflammatory diet is? I'm sure that you've heard lots of different people describe it in many different ways. And it's a little bit confusing for most people because when you're trying to figure out how to decrease inflammation and you hear from one person that a particular food is okay to eat, and you may hear from somebody else that that same food is not okay to eat. So what do you do and how do you split that information apart? So what I'm going to talk to you today about is a therapeutic anti-inflammatory diet, which is typically going to be practitioner specific. So in my office, the way that I use a therapeutic anti-inflammatory diet is that we have a couple of goals in mind. Number one, we want to reduce inflammation caused by food proteins. This could be gluten, this could be casein, it could be proteins in soy, or it could be proteins from different types of foods that are common allergens. So we want to eliminate some of the inflammation that's caused by these dietary proteins, and it's not like you eat them and all of a sudden you swell up. Typically this type of inflammation is going to be low level inflammation that starts to build up over time when consuming these foods. So many people who have eaten wheat their whole life may not realize that their body's having an immune response to some of the proteins in that food, and they've come to think that how I feel is part of normal aging. And unfortunately, that may be the case for some people, but there's a large number of people where some of these dietary proteins and the inflammation that's caused from those dietary proteins is starting to wear the body down internally and building up inflammation. And so by removing some of those dietary proteins, we can start to reduce inflammation in the body. And inflammation isn't the enemy, but it is the enemy when you have chronic stress from inflammation. So we want to be able to invoke a normal inflammatory response when we get sick or we hurt ourselves, but we don't want to be accumulating inflammatory stress from our diet when we're expecting that we're being healthy. The second goal of an anti-inflammatory diet, or a therapeutic anti-inflammatory diet in my office, is to stabilize blood sugar. Many different processes in the body, from hormone transport to neurotransmitter production, are reliant on a stable blood sugar. If the blood sugar is fluctuating up and down, it inhibits the ability to move some of the nuts and bolts that make neurotransmitters into the brain, and it can inhibit our body's ability to move hormones around so that the body can't effectively send signals from one organ system to another. So there are 6 groups of foods that we want to remove, the Sinister Six, in the therapeutic anti-inflammatory diet that I use in my office. All grains, all dairy products, whether it's from a sheep, cow, camel, it doesn't matter. All nuts, beans, seeds, and legumes. All nightshades, that's tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, paprika, and so on. Other common allergens kind of fit into this broad group, like eggs and shellfish. And then the last would be high glycemic fruits. And there's a lot more details that go into how we would use this therapeutically with regard to like how often we're eating and other things like that really make this a therapeutic lifestyle and dietary change so that we can change lab work and have an influence on some chronic symptoms that people are feeling from autoimmune disease or other types of chronic conditions. So what do you eat then if you're not eating those things from the Sinister Six? Because that probably makes up a good portion of your diet. Well, primarily you eat meat, poultry, fish, game, vegetables, and fruit. The food that we find walking around, swimming around, and growing in the ground should make up the large part of our diet. This diet isn't meant to be a lifelong diet. It is therapeutic, but it should be repeated at different times of the year for most people. And in my opinion, this type of diet, meat, vegetables, and fruit, is the true starting point for moderation. You don't want to moderate away from the standard American diet and do a couple of things and say, okay, well, I'm doing a great job, and expect to have your health change from really sick to feeling really well. You want to moderate away from your starting point. And the starting point are the things that naturally grow in the ground or walk around. Not that everything can be eaten, but the things that we have found over the course of human history through trial, error, and passed down knowledge to be appropriate to eat, those foods are the things that we want to eat in larger abundance. So you may say, well, Dr. Robles, grains are growing naturally in the ground, so why would that be an issue? So let's cover that really quickly before we end this video. Number one is that you wouldn't just go into a field and take a handful of grains and pop them into your mouth and chew them. And if you did, you wouldn't do that for very many grains because you'd break your teeth. Second is that they're designed to pass through the digestive system undigested. so that they can be laid down in this nice pile of fertilizer and have a new plant grow. So seeds and grains and things like that are not really meant to be eaten in large quantities for an extended period of time. They're really good for starvation prevention. So don't get me wrong, it's not that there's not a role for them in our diet. It's a matter of when we have an accumulation of an overabundance of these types of foods that start to cause inflammation over a period of time. It is in the best interest of many people who want to feel better to start to remove some of those things and allow the body to really start on that process of healing or the path to health. All right. I hope this information really starts to break down like what an anti-inflammatory diet is, and pretty much you're looking at what are the goals of why you're changing your diet, and that should really give you a little bit more clear idea of whose anti-inflammatory diet you want to follow or what the purpose of it is, and then what your expectations should be when you start to follow it. That's why working with a doctor like myself is important, is because we can help set your expectations of what's a realistic outcome depending on the length of time that you're doing it and the other types of procedures that you're going through, and then what's unrealistic. What are the things that may be broken enough that you're not really going to see an appreciable change in maybe 2 to 3 weeks or 2 to 3 months. It just depends on the person and their symptoms. All right, I hope this information helps you get on your path to health.